The global economy may be growing, but here in Northwest Indiana, manufacturing and construction jobs are not being replaced with jobs of similar pay or security. Today on Roundtable Perspective, Tony Sindone joins me in examining economic development in Northwest Indiana, money, technology, and how it affects the quality of life, gross domestic product, and what they call gross regional product. Join me and Tony today. Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Lee Artz. I'm joined today by my guest, Tony Sindone. Anthony is an assistant professor at Purdue Northwest in finance and economic development. And today we're going to discuss money. You got your master's from Notre Dame. You're now the director of the professional MBA program at Purdue Northwest.
That's correct.
And also a member of the Regional Council of Economic Advisors for Northwest Indiana.
That's right. Old title, no salary,
Okay.
just so you know.
Well, then how can you talk to us about money?
Well, because people ask me about it, and so I'll give my 2 cents about what I think of it.
All right, maybe we can come back to the Regional Council because I think it'll be of interest to people in Northwest Indiana. But I'd really like to start with maybe you could give us a glimpse of what you talked about at the Sinai Forum on money and why we obsess about it and how we manipulate it. And what's money?
Sure, that's a great question. First of all, it wasn't part of the Sinai Forum. I was asked to give like a preamble to the Sinai Forum speaker series because yesterday, we had a speaker, Sheila Kolhatkar, who had written a book called Black Edge, which was a book about how they caught a billionaire on Wall Street using insider trading to make unfair trades. And it was basically a story about how the FBI and the SEC was able to track this guy down, Stephen Cohen, and find him $1.8 billion. And so some of the folks at the university said that maybe people won't understand about the money or about the finance and that kind of thing, too technical kind of thing. So they asked me if I would come out there and just say a few words about whatever finance. And in fact, the first thing I thought of was, oh, how boring is that going to be for the general audience, right? Talking about finance and puts and calls and all this other stuff, right? I said, well, why don't I talk about money, what money really is? And that's why I came up with that title, Money, a Magnificent Obsession. The question is, what is money? On Wednesday, I said, money is an idea backed by confidence. Now, let me explain. Money is an idea backed by confidence. It's not backed by anything else.
Sounds like a godlike.
We created money, right? We created this thing we call money. We believe it's useful, therefore it is useful.
Its use is, its function is, how we use it is.
Yes, exactly.
Is primarily what, though? I mean, money, we use it to exchange.
Yeah.
It's a medium?
Yeah, the formal definition, and I learned this in school about 110 years ago, is that money has to have 3 primary functions, right? It has to act as a medium of exchange, it must retain a store of value, and it is simply our unit of account. The unit of account simply means that we price things based on our money. Store of value means that we have confidence that, let's say I give you $10 today for something, you'll be able to take that $10 and trade it for something of at least equal value. So it stores that value. Now, where does that value come from? It comes from here. That's all it is. It comes from what we believe to be true. Part of my talk, when I discussed what money was, I said money is as real as fairy dust. I even used that metaphor. I said because, if you believe in fairies and believe in fairy dust, you believe in what money really is. It's not backed by gold anymore. It's not backed by silver. It is simply backed by the confidence we have in its use.
So what is it representing? If it's a medium, it has to be able to communicate some value. I mean, the $10 example you used. So what's it representing? Because otherwise, If it's just a question of confidence, you get some great speaker in office and you get a Fed chairman and they say this is it and they just print a lot of money in as long as people have confidence. But that's inflationary if you just start passing out money with nothing to back it up. And if you're saying you just back it up with confidence, we could print more money? Is that what you're, I mean, that sounds like a new economic theory to me.
And that's never happened before? There's actually, there is an actual theory called, it's modern monetary theory, which says that we can, well, first of all, we don't print up most of our money. Money is nothing more than blips on a screen. I can see computer screens over here and here in the studio. When you and I buy something anymore, rarely do we dip into our pocket and pull out currency, right?
It's an accounting.
It's an accounting, right? We swipe a card, we transfer funds.
Okay, I'm going to push this.
Okay, go ahead.
So they transfer funds. The funds we got were not given to us. Usually the fund, well, unless I inherit it, like if I'm a 1% and inherit. Sure. But the rest of us go to work.
Yes.
So we are given money as a representation of what we've done to contribute to whatever, the fast food restaurant or the furniture maker
or college professors.
Or college professors. Yeah, well, it would be a question of what is the value that we create, but that would be a separate,
that's a different show.
That's a separate question. So but I get the point about we don't carry cash and there's a blip and there's an account and this much goes in and this much comes out. And my question is the part that goes in, is that just based upon somebody having confidence that we're a good person and we need that money? Or is that based on the fact that we actually do some physical activity that we are given that money representing whatever our contribution was?
Sure, it is the compensation we receive for using our labor power to produce something of value for somebody else.
Whether it's an NBA superstar that's producing value for all the viewers or a guy that's flipping a burger.
Exactly.
Yep.
And of course, we are compensated, and I've said this before in many of my other talks, I said we are compensated based on the value places on our service to society. And so, flipping the burger, we get, $8, $10 an hour, whatever it is. Professors, we get whatever we get. Steel workers get whatever they get. And it's a negotiated amount. You might not believe it's negotiated, but it is, because you can always turn down a job. You may not want to turn down a job because we still use this money in order to buy other things. So your point is very well taken when you said it has value, but that value is a perception. That value is a perception. It's not real. But it's as real as it gets. The thing is that we are compensated. We take whatever the bank balance is on our, we now have phones. We could take a look at our bank statement, right? And we could say, well, this is how much money I have. Well, actually, it's just a number, right? And then if I go buy something, that number goes down, okay? And that gives us, first of all, why do we buy anything? Because we receive some kind of value, some kind of internal value. Economists call it utility, right? We get some usefulness out of this. This mug right here has usefulness because it can hold water and maybe other things, but it can hold water and it's useful to us, so we'd be willing to take some of our hard-earned money to pay for that.
We're paying for somebody else's hard-earned money who made the cup.
Absolutely,
right.
Absolutely, because somebody made this cup, right? Somebody had to make investments to build the plastic molds that were used to make this cup, or ceramic. I don't know exactly what it's made out of. Somebody had to paint it, right? Somebody took the risk in making these mugs in anticipation that it would sell in the open marketplace. And so,
Which is the other half of this. If we push this a little bit, I'm not really through with this line of inquiry about the value, though.
Okay.
I have trouble wrapping my head around something that has a use value. It would seem to me it would have to have the use value for it to have any value at all.
Of course.
Even if that use may not be something you or I want, like if somebody wraps a trinket around their arm and it's useful to them because they like to have trinkets wrapped around their arm, which may not be, but it has to be useful for some reason for somebody.
Of course.
So here's the question, because for that money to get to the coffers of the people that are interested in making a profit, who pay us to make them, they don't make any money. Money doesn't come back until these are sold. Yes?
Correct.
So to increase the sales, which would be to increase the money coming back, we use advertising, we use marketing, we use other things, and we end up in a consumer-driven society.
Exactly.
So if we're eating up resources in order to make more money.
And this is your point is very well taken because first of all, I have to quickly answer that by saying who determines if it's needed or not. The consumer themselves determine if it's needed or wanted. If it brings them value and they're willing to pay something for that, who am I to tell them that they should not buy that? Having said,
who are you to tell them that they need it?
I'm not there to tell them that they need it. They tell themselves they need it.
We teach advertising in the communication department.
Right.
One of the things we teach is that people don't want things until they get advertised. I mean, you think about spritzer, which is something that was really big a few years ago at Christmas, and where did that come from? For 200 years, men didn't need spritzer. We didn't wear perfume because it wasn't manly, right? But the perfume makers realized half of their market they're not selling to, so they want a huge marketing campaign with Stetson and others. So there wasn't a want, and there certainly wasn't a need there before the advertisers entered the picture to increase the sales of perfume, only we'll call it spritzer.
Sure. And the thing is that, people being in business, they try to open up new markets and they try to sell to new consumers, right? Or they try to add on to what consumers are already buying from them. I can go all the way back to Henry Ford. Henry Ford was very famous at saying if I asked people what they wanted, they would want a faster horse, right? So instead of the faster horse, he said, I'm going to make automobiles cheaper and I'm going to raise the salaries of my employees so they can buy my automobiles, and that's going to make me a wealthier man than I already am. And we benefit from cars, I believe, right? But at the time, we didn't know that we benefited from cars, right? Now, getting back to your second point, or the second half of your point, you said, how about sustainability? One of the issues I take with how we measure our economy, we use GDP, right? Gross domestic product, which is really a summation of all total spending, right? Government spending, consumer spending, and business investment, and something we call net exports, okay? The issue there is that we don't have a measure for sustainable spending. There's a school of thought out there that says maybe we should take a look at net economic welfare. That becomes a very gray area. That becomes a very difficult thing to measure because we like to quantify. The thing is, suppose, right, Argentina decides that they're going to clear cut all their forests, right, and they're going to sell the wood to the rest of the world. Well, that one particular year, they have tremendous GDP, okay? But what happens in year two? Not so much, right? So then, that particular year, they do sell, and it's a great thing for that one particular year, but that it's not sustainable. If you dig a coal mine and you strip mine coal, and there's nothing left after that, well, that's not sustainable, okay? So I do believe that we need to come up with a different measure for our gross domestic product, and I agree with that. But then getting back to the very micro issue of whether or not somebody should buy this mug, or somebody should buy the new iPhone, or somebody should buy the new, I don't know, what are these things that they have at the house where you can ask it questions, that's not up to me to say. That is up to the consumer. That's the relationship between the consumer and the producer of those goods. That's
part of what I think we're looking at, and I don't know if that's what it's called the Regional Council of Economic Advisors. And that would be one thing that I would note about Northwest Indiana. Thousands of people, tens of thousands of people had jobs producing things that we need, and now they're not there. What did I think you gave us some figures that per capita income in Indiana has declined in the past 5 years, and Northwest Indiana is not even in that kind of shape. So what is the Economic Council? What is your purpose? What are your...
Well, I'm very happy to talk to you about the Regional Council of Economic Advisors. It's actually a collaborative effort among economists and other analysts among Purdue Northwest, IUN, Valparaiso University, and Center for Workforce Innovations. We work together in trying to gather data and information about the economy of Northwest Indiana primarily, which is a 7-county region. A lot of people don't know what we consider Northwest Indiana. It would be Lake, Porter, LaPorte, Newton, Jasper, Pulaski, and Stark counties. So it's 7 counties. And we're looking at a lot of different things. We look at industry mix. We look at per capita income, as you pointed out. We look at what's called GRP, which is gross regional product, very similar to gross domestic product. And what we try to do is we try to give the folks and present the people of Northwest Indiana a sense of how we're doing in terms of our economy. Now, getting a little bit back to the GDP story that we were talking about before, the issue is this: if we focus on GDP, or in our case GRP, as a measure, and then what happens is that policy is enacted to try to make that measure larger, right?
Yes.
To try to move the needle, as they say, right?
Yeah.
Well, this is what we're going to look at, right? Was that the only thing we should look at? Of course not. And then, so we try to portray that and convey that to the folks in Northwest Indiana.
So if you're measuring the GDP, for instance, if U.S. Steel continues to make steel at the same rate they were 30 years ago, that's part of the GDP.
Yeah, or GRP,
Right.
and GDP for the country, but
right,
GRP for the region.
here.
Yes, yes.
Yes, but the question would be, they don't have as many people working there as they did before. How does that affect the GRP, or that would not necessarily affect the GRP?
Well, it's interesting because it's a difficult thing to measure, because even though we could produce more steel than we did 30 years ago with 25% of the workforce because of technological improvements, those people just simply didn't disappear. What happened is that the steel industry also has other companies that service the steel industry. Some of those people are working in those industries. And so it's not like the people disappeared and they're all unemployed. And
well, that's a question. Has the population stayed the same in the last 30 years?
Well, 30 years is tough.
Well, okay.
30 years, it's it's gone up and down. We are seeing a kind of a leveling off. I call it going sideways. We're not really improving, but we're not falling too far behind.
So the population's stable in Northwest.
Population is close to what it was. And the thing is that what we are finding is that we have an aging population here. We are finding young people, when they get their degree, let's say, right? They say, well, I don't see anything here, which isn't always true, by the way. I don't see anything here. I'm going to go elsewhere. They earn their money elsewhere. They come back when they start having kids and they want to be back with their grandparents, right? And the grandparents are still here. So we're seeing an aging population here. One of the things about technology, though, is that technology also creates other opportunities, because somebody has to implement the technology. Somebody has to repair the technology. Somebody has to install it. I said implement it, right? Somebody has to design it.
The question would be how many of those somebodies it takes. I read in the New York Times just last week, as technology becomes introduced, the number of employees, or whether they're skilled or not skilled, programmers or not, is just
It's diminishing.
It's diminishing.
It's diminishing.
Yes.
I even heard the same thing about lawyers. They're saying you don't need as many lawyers anymore, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that, because I'm in consulting practice where I work with lawyers, so any attorneys don't listen to that.
Yes.
So yeah.
Okay, we've got the GRP in Northwest Indiana. It's has not increased as quickly or at the same level as the rest of the country, and even in that. What employment and wages in this region compared to the GRP, has there been has it increased the same? Has it gone sideways?
It's getting better. Let me put it that way. A couple of years ago, of course.
Isn't that what economists always say?
I know. It's like Harry Truman, one of the one-armed economists, right? That's the old story. But what we're seeing is that incomes are slightly improving. The unemployment level is still a little bit higher here than it is for the rest of the state of Indiana, and certainly for the rest of the country. But the issue is not the unemployment rate. Everybody focuses on that measure. The way they measure unemployment is terrible. It's absolutely terrible, because it counts anybody who is working 1 hour a week for a wage as employed. Right. We have a lot of people that are underemployed. And so that is something that we need to work on. And I've been focusing a lot of attention in my work with the Regional Council on workforce development. How do we get the workforce to obtain the skills that will be in demand tomorrow? Because I really don't know what the skills are that are going to be in demand tomorrow, but I do know that it's going to be different than they are today.
The question remains, say you knew what these skills are, use the steel industry, and you train people for it. That's still not going to raise the number of employees that you might have had 10, 15, 20 years ago. There's still there's a cap on that. The question would be, where does everybody else go for
Interesting thing about skills, if you ever do any research on skill levels, there's this concept called crosswalking. People who worked in the steel industry, they have a whole set of skills. It isn't just one skill, right? They have a whole set of skills. Some of those skills can be crosswalked, as we say, can be applied in other industries. And so many of these people are getting other jobs in other places. Are they getting the same pay they did at U.S. Steel and ArcelorMittal? Probably not, but they are still employed. and they're developing new skills along the way. We still have to make things.
Well, yeah, you can't have money if you don't make
We
things.
still have to make things, exactly.
The question is, when we make things, who gets the value of that? And that's the thing that probably drives my concern more than anything. I was a steel worker, and I worked here, and I recognized that in Gary, Indiana, you had lovely little bungalows, nice car outside, little stores, little shops. U.S. Steel introduces technology and even does the thing where they're going to retrain people. But Gary doesn't look the way it did 20, 30 years ago, not because people don't know how to mow their lawn or paint their house, but because those jobs have just disappeared and they haven't really gone overseas. So that I think for Northwest Indiana, that's something the regional council, and I'm glad to hear that you're talking about underemployment or partial employment and the training that has to take place.
Right.
Maybe we can end, we don't have a lot of time left, but maybe we can end and just give us some observations on the various tax plans that are before Congress and what that might mean for Northwest Indiana.
Well, until they actually have something definitive about the tax plan, it's very difficult to talk about it. I mean, seriously, you know. One hand you hear somebody talk about, well, it's a middle class tax cut. I don't really see that. They also say, well, it's a tax cut for the rich. I don't see that exclusively either. I see that there's a lot of shuffling of the chairs on the ship, so to speak. And until we can really get something definitive, it's very difficult to do any kind of analysis on the economic impact of whatever the tax plan is going to be for the nation, let alone the region.
Could you make some commentary? I know the governor of Kansas was almost a test tube baby for tax cuts, because the idea we're going to make this huge cut and it's going to get us all kinds of jobs, and the outcome of that was what?
Wasn't what they expected. It wasn't what they anticipated. They projected, right? Yes. So I know Congress uses this thing called dynamic scoring, right? Yes. Which means if you cut taxes, people have more money in their pocket, they're going to spend more money, therefore people are going to produce more goods, therefore they're going to hire more people. That doesn't always happen.
Well, it depends on who gets a tax cut, though. I mean, if you and I get the tax cut, we'll have money in our pocket, but if the people that already have more money than they could spend in a lifetime get a tax cut, the question is, what will they do with that? At least that's my understanding.
That's a great question. And the idea here is that let's say I had $10 million, right? I was making $10 million. That's not what our salary is, by the way. But let's say I have $10 million and I get a tax cut of $1.2 million, right? What am I going to do with that money? I'm not going to stuff it in a mattress. I'm not going to dig a hole in the backyard. I'm going to have to put it to work. Rich people don't get rich, other than inheriting. They don't get rich by being stupid, right? They get rich because they're able to make investments, and those investments would create companies, create perhaps value, create jobs, those sorts of things, and that's the idea behind it. That's the idea behind this dynamic scoring as well, saying you give somebody more money in their pocket, they could invest that money, and therefore the economy, it's kind of like the rising tide. The economy should do better.
I guess the question would be, is there empirical evidence to show that has ever happened? I mean, the immediate instance was with Kansas, just the opposite happened. Because you may have the extra $1 million, that doesn't mean you have to spend it. Nobody's compelling you to spend it.
Right.
And if you're not going to invest and make the return that you think you should get, you can sit on it. Or you can use that to lobby and influence laws so that you get the return that you want. And in the interim, there is no trickle down, so to speak. I had actually thought that concept of trickle down had kind of lost its purchase in economic theory.
Well, the idea of trickle down came from the early 1980s, right? The Reagan administration, Arthur Laffer, and all those folks, right? And so the idea was to reduce the tax rate so that tax revenues would actually rise because people would earn more income and they would spend more money, and therefore creating more income and a ripple effect and a multiplied effect. The last time that happened, under the Reagan administration, there was a massive tax cut. But on top of that, there was also increase in government spending. There was a lot of Keynesian economics there too. And so it was very difficult to separate out the tax cut from the Keynesian stimulus. Although we had a tremendous growth in the 1980s, and I'll tell you what started the decline in the growth, the tax plan of 1986, when we actually increased taxes due to closing so-called loopholes that were generally enjoyed mostly by the rich. And then we saw a slight decline, which was really seen in 1990 during the recession there. And then the Clinton administration came in and did a great job. And so,
Well, it's one of the problems we have is, speaking of economy, is the economy of time for this show.
okay.
And we certainly could continue this conversation, and,
Sure.
and perhaps we can have you back to do it. And I look forward to hearing some
I'd
of your
love to
talks.
be back.
So-
I'd love to be
but
invited back. Thank you.
That's all the time we have on our program. Thank you, Tony Sindone, for joining me today on Roundtable Perspective. I'm Lee Artz. I'll see you next time.